Hey, welcome into the Late Night Gamecock Show. I'm your host, Matt Anderson. And joining me, as always, is Alex Jones of thebigspur.com. Alex, how you doing?
Doing great. It's great to be back here. I know we got a lot to get to, both softball and baseball, but it's good to be back here with everybody.
This episode is going to be very softball and baseball heavy. And really, because I think that for different reasons, we need to talk about both programs right now. One is, reaching the top of the mountain in a lot of ways, and the other is down in the valley. And to have that conversation tonight, I'm really excited for John Whittle to be joining us. So Alex, go ahead and bring John in here, and we'll get this show started. Hey, John, how are you?
Good evening, gentlemen. Great to see you guys on a beautiful Wednesday evening.
It's really nice. It looks really nice where you are.
Yeah, it is kind of nice back there, isn't it?
Are the birds chirping?
They're not as active at night as in the morning, but maybe we'll hear something eventually.
I hear you. Well, John, as I said before you hopped on here, you really have two programs, the softball program and the baseball program, going in different directions. And we want to talk about all of that with you tonight. So, Alex, go ahead and roll the intro, and then we'll get into softball and baseball with John.
Welcome to the Late Night Gamecock Show from Chief Sports, South Carolina. Here are your hosts, Matt Anderson and Alex Jones of thebigspur.com.
Well, again, everyone, thank you for joining us. As John said, on this beautiful Wednesday evening, it's May 28th, the last show of May. And I think for a lot of Gamecock fans, May can't get over fast enough. Let's get on to the summer, get on the boat, not have any worries in the world until football starts.
Well, I have a question for you real quick. I'm going to start this interview by asking you all a question. Is it really late night if it's still light outside? Do we need to push this back like 2 hours or what?
This is true. Whenever, I guess maybe during football season when we start this show, it is nighttime. But once you get to the summer part, we are still not quite late night, but I guess here we are.
I can turn the lights off, John, if it makes you more comfortable.
But the late evening show, late evening show, yeah.
The after dinner show.
There you go.
Yeah,
there you go.
So before we talk softball and baseball with you, John, just to confirm, we don't expect Colin Murray Boyles to withdraw his name at the deadline tonight at 11:59, correct?
No, I kind of thought the official announcement would be out by now, but it hasn't come out, I don't think, and I did not get the impression that there's going to be any kind of last second change. I think we have seen the last of CMB in a South Carolina uniform, and best wishes to him. I know he wants to go in the lottery, and he thinks there's a really good chance of that happening, and there is a pretty good chance of that happening. So we'll see how all that turns out, but he gave he gave his best for 2 good years. I don't know that we feel like when we look back on Colin, if we ever truly got a full sense of a full season of what he can do. He missed the first half of his first year with the mono, and took him a while to kind of get going. And then, obviously this year was what it was, and he played the best he could, but it's so hard to appreciate individuals in a season like that. But, certainly, I think he'll end up being one of the best players to ever play at South Carolina. I don't know that everyone will kind of think back that way, but I think ultimately I think he'll ultimately be one of the best.
To be able to average the numbers that he averaged this past season, when he was really the focal point of every defensive game plan was focused on him, and he was still able to average, I think it was a little bit above 16 points per game. So, I think kind of feels like the writing's been on the wall for a little bit for him going to the draft. You can see in the latest mocks, I think it's as high as 7 I've seen, and then maybe about the average, maybe about that 12 to 14 range. So, as you mentioned, he gave his all for South Carolina, and I think it would have been interesting to see, if he didn't come down with mono and had that full season, what he would been able to do on that NCAA tournament team. But, I kind of feel like he did all he could, and, good luck to him.
Yeah, and the best thing I think is for Juju Jackson to get it going in the pros, get Colin Murray Boyles going in the pros, and have a somewhat of a pipeline. I mean, South Carolina has always been best with South Carolina homegrown talent in a lot of different ways in the basketball program's history. Outside of Frank McGuire and that New York City Underground Railroad he had, it's always been South Carolina players that do the best. So, and hopefully, there's a kid at Wilson in my hometown, Florence, South Carolina, that is going to have an opportunity there to be a top 10 player, maybe following Colin Murray Boyles and Gigi Jackson's footsteps. But moving on to softball, I got to be completely honest. I have not tuned in to softball in my entire life as much as I tuned in, especially in the second half of the season. Once they got to 20-0 and it became, wow, are they going to be a top 10 team all season? And sure enough, that ended up being a national seed. What about y'all? Have y'all watched a lot of softball in your day?
No. No, I've never been to a South Carolina softball game until this year. I was a student here, never went. Been covering the university for however many years it's been now. I guess going back to about 2008. Never been to a softball game before until this season. So went to a few. I think I went I didn't make it opening weekend. I made it the second weekend for a game and ended up over the course of the year making it about a dozen, 13, 14, right in that range. So fun season to watch. I mean, and a fun, kind of a fun sport to watch too. It's pretty fast paced, and also it doesn't take forever. You're usually out of there in 2.5 hours, when some of those baseball games they can go a while.
Yeah, it was funny. I mean, just learning the rules, because my wife played softball at the high school level and competitive like travel ball her whole life. And I didn't realize that you could take a pitcher out of the game and then put the pitcher back in later. That was a new one for me.
But, yeah. And South Carolina did that effectively a couple of times over the course of the year. And then one time not so effectively there in the super regional. But, I don't think Ashley Chastain Woodard would have done anything differently. Just one mistake pitch, and that kind of changed the trajectory of the season for them. After losing game 2 the way they did.
It's just so hard to be 1 out away from the College Softball World Series and be hosting it in front of your fans. And it was just a gut punch, I think, for the entire fan base, because they wanted it so badly. And Gamecock fans have shown that they will support the teams. I mean, the women's basketball program draws record crowds, and softball was doing that this year. People getting out there, and it doesn't matter what the sport is. If they had, a lot of seating for the equestrian team and they were winning national championships, people would be out there too. So, Alex, how much softball did you watch in the past?
Not a whole lot, but I watched a lot of it this year, be it on streaming or TV. And I mean, like y'all both said, it's a whole lot of fun to watch because the game keeps on moving. And I mean, it helps when, the team out there was really good. And I mean, it's pretty incredible to watch what they're able to do in the first year under Ashley Chastain Woodard. I mean, they were pretty consistent from the start, got those big wins early, and they just kept it rolling in SEC play. And, just being that you were 1 out away, that one's going to hurt. That one's going to sting a little while. But, they do lose some key players, it seems, from this team, but they've also got a few of those key players returning as well. So it's going to be interesting to see, how they continue building this thing, but they're off to a pretty good start, I'd say.
John, with you covering them a little bit more than you have in the past, what's your take on Ashley and what she's trying to accomplish here, what her goals are? And obviously the goal is to win it all, win the SEC championship, but is this the kind of team that she wants to have going forward? Is this the kind of complementary softball that they can play, lean in on pitching and defense and getting a couple big boppers in there as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the biggest deal for her is certainly the pitching and defense side of things. They need a couple more arms. I mean, they had 2 really good ones this year, and Sam Grass and Jory Hurd. Neely Lamb was effective at times as a third pitcher, but they will want to upgrade a little bit next year, just in terms of the quantity of arms and maybe a little bit of the quality too. There wasn't a whole lot of depth there. I mean, those top 3 were pretty good. You lose Sam Grass, who was South Carolina's only all-SEC player, which is pretty incredible. I mean, if you're the number 8 national seed in the country and only have one player who's all league, I don't know what that says. I mean, you could read into it several different ways. To me, it means that your coaching staff is getting, every bit of talent out of everybody that they can. So I think that's a big credit to Ashley. But, they're going to need to replace Sam, and, Jory's going to need to take a step forward, and, so is Neely. And I think they will, but they're probably going to want to add at least 2, probably 3 more arms, and, at least one of them be a very high end arm.
So you got $1 million in NIL there for a pitcher like Texas Tech did last offseason?
It'll be interesting to see, like, if this house settlement comes through. I mean, I guess you could be going in the portal right now, because the portal right now is open, and if you can get somebody before this house settlement, you can pay them all kinds of the funny money that you want, and pay them $1 million or whatever you have in the coffers. If they wait until this house settlement gets passed, then, that's going to restrict them tremendously in terms of what they will be able to pay out, because the softball budget is not going to be very high once revenue share kicks in. So, they're going to have to get some things accomplished now, and take care of some players who are currently on the roster, and, hopefully, they can add a little bit here soon.
And that's the big thing for me when you think about NIL and this house settlement and what's going to happen, what's not going to happen. But now is the time to capitalize on it. Hey, look, we're a couple power arms away. Let's get some people that, maybe their daughters played softball growing up. They can take all that money they spend on travel softball and just throw it into the Gamecock softball program. Well, hey, why not? That's what I'll do when my time comes. I guess the last thing to talk about is just, the amount of players that she brought over from Charlotte and the success that they had at the SEC level. Does that just talk about the development side of what Ashley can do when, you have players that maybe necessarily weren't highly recruited, but they did come into the SEC and they produced? And, I'm excited to see where she goes from that transfer portal standpoint, because it's not always grabbing an SEC player or an ACC player. You can go find players in baseball and softball, especially.
Yeah, and I agree. There's certainly some development that's going on, but it also speaks to her and her coaching staff's ability to, spot some talent and, get them to buy in to what they're doing. And, you're able to recruit a different caliber of player when you're at South Carolina, so you don't necessarily need to go find a diamond in the rough who can be great at Charlotte and develop them. You can go out and just recruit a different caliber of player too. And so I do think that, there's a lot of development that has happened under Ashley, over the course of this year and, during her time at Charlotte. And I think that's a credit to her and her coaching staff. I mean, they've done a tremendous job. You look at a couple of the players who, they didn't have a lot of holdover players. But the ones they did, whether it was a, Brooke Blankenship or whether it was a Carly Shelton or whoever, they really improved from last year to this year. And, I think it's a tremendous credit, not only to those girls for working as hard as they did, but also the staff.
Didn't they also have some official visitors in town for the Supers? Did I hear
that? And they did. And you and Kara Luca are probably going to ask me for names, and I don't have them.
No. Trust me, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, there are a couple of message boarders who are saying, "Get us some portal updates," and I don't have them yet. But yeah, I do know that they have. They had double-digit visitors in, over the weekend, and some of them were from the portal, some of them were, high schoolers and committed in the recruiting class, and they had a variety of folks who were there at Beckham Field, and they had to be really impressed with the atmosphere. That place was pretty packed for at least for the second 2 games, and really pretty packed for the first one too. A few empties over there all the way up the third baseline, but left field line, I guess. But they had to be impressed with the atmosphere.
John, you're telling me you don't have softball 2028 class and who they're targeting? You don't have that yet?
No, I don't have all that quite yet. But maybe soon.
Well, we lost Alex here for a little bit, but John, I do want to go into talking about the baseball program now. And you've heard me say this numerous times. I like to look back to look forward. And as we look back at this time last year, Mark Kingston has been dismissed as a South Carolina baseball coach. And, there's a coaching search going on, and you were all over that coaching search. And there were some big names on that coaching search list and big names that Ray Tanner talked to. And then it seems like Paul Mainieri kind of, I don't want to say came out of thin air, but it moved very fast. Once Paul Mainieri kind of made that phone call to Ray, or Ray made the phone call to Paul. I don't know how it all played out, but I remember his press conference, and I thought he won the press conference. It's hard to lose a press conference as an introductory coach when you want to have excitement and change. But I didn't feel like anything he said in the press conference came to fruition over the course of the season.
Not much, not much. I went back and listened to the opening press conference a little over a month ago, I guess it was. And, not a whole lot did come to fruition. I'm with you. I thought he had everybody pretty fired up, that day back in June. And, it just, nothing really came together for them this year. They lost a couple of guys due to injury, and, had some guys not play well enough, and, had a bunch of guys who didn't perform as well this year as they did last year. And nothing ever came together for those guys.
It was interesting because when you had the Paul Mainieri press conference, it kind of felt like, okay, here's Lou Holtz coming to save South Carolina. Here's Steve Spurrier coming to save South Carolina. Decorated national championship winning coaches at their blue bloods. Let's call it what it is. Notre Dame in Florida, and then LSU in baseball. Those are blue bloods. And what was your take, going through the summer? What were you hearing in fall? What were they prioritizing? What's the philosophy of Paul Mainieri? Or at least what he was preaching, maybe not practicing, I guess, is where we could be.
Wait, do you want to throw in, you mentioned Steve Spurrier in Florida and Lou Holtz in Notre Dame. Do you want to throw in Dave Odom from Wake Forest for basketball too?
Or? He had that war chest of credibility.
But no, it was – There was a lot of them trying to figure out in the fall, kind of what they had. And, every bit that I got out of the fall was, there was a lot of really encouraging things from them. They liked the depth of the pitching staff. There were some guys returning that they really liked, Kennedy Jones and Talmadge LaCroix being two of them. And, obviously Talmadge got hurt really early on. There were concerns at the catcher position, which I know it sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, saying that they really like Talmadge, but also had concerns at the catcher position. But that's a place where you have to have some depth, and they didn't feel coming out of the fall like it was where it needed to be. So that was one of the main concerns. Another main concern was, even though they liked the depth of the pitching staff, behind Eli Jerzenbeck, they didn't really know if they had like the frontline top shelf starting pitching. And then obviously you lose Jerzenbeck before the year starts. So, there were certainly some concerns, but, they also felt relatively decent about what they had. I remember we sat at the preseason press conference, at the start of preseason practice back in mid-January, and the list of the projected order of finish, as voted on by the league coaches came out, and South Carolina was picked 14th. And, he basically made fun of everybody for thinking that this team would be anywhere near that. And he had already had the entire fall to evaluate the roster, and he kind of scoffed at the notion that the team would be near the bottom of the league. And I didn't really think it would be down there either. I thought it was more of a mid-pack kind of team. I projected going into the year they'd be 14 and 16 in the league, so I had them below 500. But it's they were trying to piece together a lot of things in the fall, and they spent a lot more time on the field and obviously a lot less time in the weight room, and they felt okay about things coming out of it, but that didn't prove to be true.
So you kind of get into the season, and South kind of feels like early in that non-conference slate, they're doing just enough in some of those games. They're getting by. The Clemson series happens, and I think that was kind of the red flag the fan base kind of had for what was going to happen this season. But then they come back against Morehead State. But to me, and not just to me, but I feel like this is to everybody else. The downfall started to kind of feel like that third game, the Oklahoma series, that Sunday game. South kind of had it in the ninth inning, and they got away from them, and they lost. Was that kind of, you feel like, the turning point of the season where things really started to kind of take a downhill? Because you had that Arkansas series where they just weren't competitive at all, and it really went from there.
Yeah, I mean, that was huge. I mean, there were certainly red flags before that series going into SEC play. You mentioned the Clemson series, and they had to have a couple of comeback wins or a couple of tight wins there early in non-conference play, and then you get into the Clemson series, and most of those games are nip and tuck until the final 2 and 3 innings where South Carolina would make mistakes and Clemson would outplay them, and that was a trait of last year's Clemson team. So it wasn't like a crazy big surprise. Like Clemson last year would always just find a way to win those close games at the end, whether it was by comeback or just holding on or whatever. So that wasn't like a crazy big surprise, but it's a red flag when you couldn't play well at the end of games in that series. And you get to Oklahoma and, you're up. And then, one of the best things about this year's team, really to include that point in time, was, you've been playing really well defensively. And I mean, you gave that game away on your defense. And, I wrote about it at the time and after that series and my takeaways, just, you worry about – You worry about those games because it's like, okay, you kind of found a way to lose this one. And my sense was heightened because of the basketball season, to be honest with you. It's like, what do we talk about all of January and into February? Like, when you keep losing close games, it just kind of becomes ingrained in you. Like you forget how to win. Like I hate to put it so bluntly, but you just become losers. And, you didn't want that to happen with baseball, and they weren't there at that point. But, you start going through some of the conference series and you start losing games in weird ways and not winning games in weird ways. And that's just kind of the way it happened for baseball as it did for basketball. But yeah, I mean, that Oklahoma series, Oklahoma was picked to finish mid-pack in the league, and South Carolina was obviously, as we talked about, picked to finish 14th, and those are the kind of series you have to win to kind of flip the script, right? Like if you want to finish in the mid-pack, you've got to beat the mid-pack teams at home. Like you just have to, and you didn't. And you go on the road the next week to Arkansas, and I can't even remember all the order of everything. But, the first half of the season, you have Mississippi State on the road. You have Tennessee at home. I mean, you're playing some of the best teams in the conference, the first 5 weekends of league play. And, you need the wins. And to give away one like that at home, it was a really bad omen.
It just kind of felt like, and you keyed in on it, John, innings 7, 8, and 9. And we talked a lot about it here. I mean, most shows have, but I went back and looked. I think it was going into the Florida series, and the Gamecocks had been outscored something like 66 runs in the final 3 innings of SEC games. That's unheard of. And you're talking about essentially a -3 runs per game in the last 3 innings, and that's how you lose. And some of those were just didn't even get to the 8th inning, didn't get to the 9th inning, and they were still putting those numbers up. But it's been so long since I've seen a Gamecock baseball team give up those types of games. Now, they might go run up with the score on somebody else, especially in non-league play, and run into some of those games in the SEC, but it became a comedy of errors a lot of the time. It was actually like funny to watch, and it's not funny for the players or the coaches, but it's like, wow, how does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And, part of it, goes back to what I was mentioning. Like is when you keep racking up losses, you just figure out ways to lose and don't play well at the end. And, South Carolina just had a team that really didn't come through too often and clutch spots and in big moments. And, you had some older guys. I mean, you certainly had some younger guys, your Scobies and your Hollands and your Braylons and whatnot, but you had some older guys on this team too. Like, you recruited out of the portal and you recruited some JUCO kids, and you've had some guys who've been around. Like, you expect them to maybe not thrive, but certainly not wilt in those type of situations. And, it just, I mean, I know I've said this like 8 times now, nothing just came together. Nothing would come together for them. And that includes it at the end of games.
And I think about this too. And we talk about the roster, and all Paul Mainieri wants to say right now is we need better players, John, you've been around this program. How many players on the roster do you think didn't have SEC opportunities or ACC opportunities elsewhere if they hadn't come to South Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, most of them did. Like, I'm pulling up the stat page right now. Like, Nathan Hall could have gone. He was at Clemson. I mean, he could have gone to Vanderbilt or North Carolina coming out of the portal. Ethan Petrie could have gone wherever. I'm not sure all where Henry Kasmer had. Bo Hollins could have, had plenty of pick of schools. So did KJ Scobie. I mean, like, you look at the pitching staff, like Brandon Stone was down to Virginia and one other one, but, Virginia and somebody else. Jake McCoy was Clemson or North Carolina. Ashton Crowther out of the portal came from Miami. Jackson Susie had Arkansas. You look at Brendan Sweeney, who was supposed to be South Carolina's closer. He had Oklahoma. All of these guys had most of them at least had great opportunities outside of South Carolina. It wasn't a team devoid of talent. It wasn't a team devoid of players. I mean, it wasn't like South Carolina was beating out High Point and Sewanee for players. I mean, they were beating out good programs, and it just didn't work.
And that's where I go back to. There were SEC players. Now, the SEC players didn't play like SEC players for whatever reason, whether they regressed talent-wise, they weren't developed, whatever it is, I don't know. But you can't throw your players under the bus. I mean, there's nothing worse than hating who your coach is that controls your destiny, and you can't control it yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, it was, I certainly agree with you there. I don't know. I don't know. I don't feel like most of those guys were put in great position to be successful. And to me, that's one of the biggest job of the coaches, is just give your players an opportunity to maximize their talent and help them do so. And, I don't feel like that was the case in a lot of instances.
And I think this too, John, baseball especially, you can get in funks. It's kind of like golf. You can get the yips. You can get in your own head. You're playing a game where, as a batter, if you fail 7 times out of 10, you're going to the Hall of Fame in most situations. So when you are going through a funk, that's when you need to have a coach or somebody with their arm around your shoulder empowering you and just, let's go to the cage. Come on, let's work this out. If it's a pitcher, let's go use TrackMan. Let's get in the pitching labs. Just out of curiosity, John, the pitching lab was a big deal. And Mark Kingston said as much. Humongous deal for this program. How much was the pitching staff using that technology last year, and obviously not much this year, but was it a steady part of the weekly training?
Well, they didn't get it in until, mid-season last year. And, it was always going to be more about this year for that. Cause you have to go through baseline testing and there are just certain things you have to do. It was always going to be more about this year for that kind of stuff. But they used it some last year for sure. It just wasn't used this year. And, that's a big deal, I think. And, not maximizing your usage of TrackMan is such a huge deal. And to your point earlier about, just having coaches feel like they support you. I mean, those guys, Mainieri, when he would talk, I mean, it was pretty early in SEC play where he'd start kind of, making some side comments about some guys. And those were, they took notice of that in the locker room. And, it got a little bit worse over the course of the season. And they just didn't feel like they had that kind of support. And, that was, as you said, baseball is such a mental game. I mean, you got to have people kind of cheering you on. And that doesn't mean that folks are always holding your hand the whole way. Players have to be held accountable too, and, called out or held, just held accountable in general for their actions and, their work ethic and things that they need to do. But, sometimes you need like you said, sometimes you need some encouraging words as well.
I agree with you. Let's take a quick break because I do want to talk more in depth about all of that, John, when we get back. But if you haven't had dinner yet, you're going to be hungry because we're about to roll a D's Wings sponsorship.
There we go.
Mike here for one of the better dining options in the capital city. When I first moved there, I asked people around the radio station, where are the best wings? Well, the consensus was D's Wings. That was then. Today, they still have the best wings, but it's so much more now in their new location at 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia. Yeah, they get voted the best wings on a routine basis. Yes, they get voted the best sports bar on a routine basis, but they're not just about wings, and really, they're not just a sports bar. It is a family-run local restaurant and bar with 20 TVs and 25 beers on tap. And how about these daily specials? Every Monday night at D's, you've got 75-cent wings from 4 until closing. Tacos on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, 18 wings and a pitcher of beer for $29. You've also got ribs and oyster bucket specials on Thursday. And no matter how big the party is, 20 or more, no problem. Just call ahead of time and they'll take terrific care of you. They'll do takeout as well. And guess what? A human will answer the phone and take the order. Billy and his staff do an outstanding job. Check out D's 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia.
So again, D's Wings, love that. We love D's Wings. We're frequent D's customers on this particular show right here, and pretty much everyone in Columbia is. So John, you did make a little bit of a splash last week. People may have heard you had an article that came out. That article is free now, I think, on the Big Spur. So if you've missed it, go read it. John lays everything out perfectly. We're not going to do a recap of the article. I think John's probably even has to do that 30 times at this point. But one of the questions I do have for you, John, because you're so close with this program and have been for a while, I like to think about like Steve Spurrier. Well, he wouldn't really mess with the defense, but it was Steve Spurrier's team. But Steve Spurrier was in charge of the offense, and he would help with defense. But I see a lot of the assistant coaches, they get thrown under the bus. And Monty Lee seems to be everybody's whipping boy, no matter who the coach is. And I don't understand why. But, Monty Lee is the hitting coach. But how much say does he have in the entire philosophy on hitting? And the same thing with Terry Rooney on pitching. Is this mandated from Paul Mainieri? We're going to do this?
Yeah, well, Terry Rooney's got pretty much autonomy over his pitching staff. I mean, he's a pitching coach. He's the one with a pitching background. He pitched in college. That's always been his deal. And sometimes when the head coach has a pitching background, he's more involved with the pitching side of things. But that's not the way it is here. Terry's got the autonomy over the pitching staff, and that doesn't mean that the head coach isn't making decisions on when to make moves and so forth, because the onus falls on him to make those kind of calls. But, in terms of development and in terms of, just day-to-day operations, I mean, he's not really involved in that. From an offensive standpoint, he's more involved in hitting than and that side of things. And in the offensive side, Monty is the guy who's in the cage, on a day in, day out basis and working with the kids on their swings and working with the players on their swings. People get mad if you call them kids. It's just just a word. It's just part of it. We're not trying to treat them like they're babies. They're just a word. The players, he's the one in there working with them on their swings and their fundamentals and just kind of the anatomy of that. But it's kind of a Paul Mainieri approach and philosophy on what they want to do. And that because it's so easy to see the differences in last year. Like you look at what last year's team was, and, it was, you led you were right near the top of the league in walks. You were right near the top of the league in on base percentage. And you struck out a little bit too much because you would go deep in counts. And sometimes when you get to 2 strikes, you strike out. But that's what the approach was in the past. And, this year it was just kind of flipped on its head. And, that's not really Monty's style, but, it's very aggressive. They said on the broadcast before the SEC tournament game that South Carolina leads the league in chase rate, which isn't a good category to lead in. It means you're swinging at the most pitches out of the zone.
Yeah.
But they want to be aggressive. Now they want to be aggressive in the strike zone. And sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. But, if you're just trying to swing at strikes, you're not necessarily swinging it at the best. You're not necessarily swinging at the best pitch. So, or one that you can drive and be hittable. The power numbers came down and so did strikeouts because they were just putting the ball in play more. And you want to balance putting the ball in play with a pitch that you can do some damage with. And that's always been kind of the emphasis in the past. And, now it's been, get up there and get your swings in, get your hacks in there. That's one thing he kept saying about Gavin Braylon is why he liked to put Gavin Braylon in there was, he goes in there and, he's not going to be cheated on a swing. He's going to go up there and swing the bat. Yeah. That's good, but you got to swing at the right pitches too. So, it's kind of his approach and his philosophy. And it's one that, Monty has his hands on, his fingertips on from the development side of it. But it's kind of the Mainieri philosophy.
Yeah. Go ahead, Alex. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when you kind of look for a bright spot on the team, I think you have to look at KJ Scobie and Bo Hollins. And I thought, Hollins, and really you can maybe throw Scobie in as well, had a case for all SEC freshman team, and those guys didn't make it, especially Hollins batting .308. But, having those 2 guys return, young guys, freshmen on your corner infield spots, how big is that to get those guys back? And what you kind of see from those guys? So both of those guys really got better and better throughout the year.
Yeah, both of those guys are definitely a big deal to have back. And Scobie's offensive numbers, if you just look at the stats, don't jump off the page at you, especially when you look at just SEC play. He hit 224 in SEC play, which, is pretty low when you try to make a case for all SEC. But he's just such a well-rounded player and balanced player. He's so good over there defensively at third base. He ended up second on the team in home runs. The reason he ended up so low in batting average in league play, he had a slump there for about 3 or 4 weeks, kind of in the middle point of the SEC schedule, and that stuff happens. So it doesn't dampen my outlook on him for the future. I think he's a really good player and will continue to be one and continue to get better. I thought Bo Hollins was snubbed. You look at what he did in league play. He hit 288 in the league, had 6 home runs, 15 RBIs, played really good defense there at first. And, it's not broken down by position in all SEC freshmen. It's 12 players, and, I'm not saying that some of those guys weren't deserving, but I feel like Bo Hollins was certainly one of the 12 best players, 12 best freshmen in the SEC. And, those 2 guys are big pieces to have back. You need a good first baseman to hit for power. You need him to – he touches the ball so much in a game, has so many opportunities, big left-handed bat. I mean, having a great third baseman over there defensively is huge. And, I think Scobie's power is going to keep coming through. Like I said, he was second on the team in home runs, had 8 this year. I mean, I think he can get to 15 next year. So, I think both of those guys returning are such a big deal for the program.
Do have a quick question in here from Queen of the Cocks. Any shot Nathan Hall returns, John, or you think he's pretty much gone?
I can't see it. I think he's gone. I was Baseball America put out their updated list of rated prospects, which includes everybody who's draft eligible, high school kids, etc. And Hall's down at 279, which is a little bit lower than I thought he would be. But he's a day 2 pick, and I think he'll get drafted well enough to go ahead and sign and start his pro career.
So obviously, the draft's going to come up, and we'll talk a little bit about recruiting in the portal. I mean, but really, I don't think we actually know that much about the portal until it opens on the 2nd. What players are going to go in? There's stuff behind closed doors that John's aware of that he's not going to ruin a kid's moment or anything like that. So we're not going to go there. But John, looking at who the Gamecocks lose, and it's great to have a Scobie and it's great to have a Hollins back, but there is a lot of attrition on this team. I feel like from everyday players. I mean, the entire outfield is going to be gone. Yeah, you got the people in the corner. You got the 2 guys on the corners. Shortstop second. You talk about all the time. Catcher, shortstop second, in the middle of the field. What are we looking at next year for this Gamecock team, and what do they have to go find?
Well, you're losing your second baseman for sure. You're losing your entire outfield. I think you're going to end up losing your shortstop, be it in some capacity. I mean, Henry Kazmer may get drafted. The portal will be closed by that point, so we'll see if he goes into the portal or not. But he's probably a day 3 pick, and we'll see what he ends up choosing from there. Baseball America had him on their list too. He was down at 449, so that's in the draft window for sure. But we'll see what all comes from that. But there's a lot to go out there and recruit, and let's just pretend that nobody was going into the portal. Okay, let's pretend everybody was coming back. You still won 6 games this year. I mean, you gotta go. You got to go out and get players regardless, even if nobody was leaving. Like
John, it's funny you say that, because like with basketball, everyone was freaking out about the transfers out of the program. I'm like, y'all do realize this team won 2 SEC games, right? Like, you wanted everyone back,
right? I mean, there may have been a couple of guys that you would want back that maybe went into the portal, but you've got to do something differently. You can't just run it back. And I did have to laugh at one of the graphics that was put out by one of the returning players that said run it back, and it's like, you can come back, but I don't think we want to run it back, right? Like, I think you may want to. I think you may want to retire that phrase for this year and come up with something a little bit different. But yeah, like there's got to be changes in the program, and you listen to the coaching staff and they'll tell you it's got to be a whole bunch of new players, and I think there definitely needs to be some new players, and but there's got to be some other changes too to be successful, and we'll see how all of that stuff kind of comes together. But yeah, I mean, like even if there were no portal, like you still have to go out there and get good players, and there's going to be a few more position players who go into the portal, and probably a couple that you don't want to go in, and there's going to be a whole slew of pitchers that are going to go into the portal, and several that you don't want to go in, but you got to go out and replace them. So, we'll see how all that comes to fruition. But the portal opens on June 2nd, and folks are probably wondering why, they haven't announced anything yet. And, I mean, reasons vary, but I mean, you're going to see it. I don't know how many announcements you're going to see between now and the 2nd, but I think you're going to see a lot come the 2nd.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see if, like, we know some players coming in, right? And that can always change, but there is a recruiting class. I think they have 7 or 11 guys in the class. What, do you know what the number is?
Well, they have 6 high school kids, and I need to get my junior college list together. It's not quite right, and I got to be sure everybody's still coming. But they've got about 7 about 6 or 7, maybe 8 now, junior college kids that are coming in, and we'll see how all that comes together. They're certainly going to be doing a lot in the portal too. I mean, I imagine they'll probably get a dozen guys in the portal.
And that's the question. Are they going to buy a team? Is that what they're going to have to do next year?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to dive too deep in the weeds on NIL. Like, probably too much has been said publicly already, just in general. At least that's how the coaching staff would view it. Like, most coaching staffs everywhere want to keep their numbers in-house, whether it's player by player or even total dollars, right? Like, they want to maintain a little bit of I don't know if competitive advantage is the right word, but, keep things quiet so competitors don't know how they're operating. They want to operate kind of in the cover of darkness, like basically everybody else. But I would just say that South Carolina has a very fair amount of money compared to what most schools are probably going to have. Now, that's assuming the house settlement goes through here pretty soon. Maybe that house settlement is resolved this week before the portal opens. And if that happens and, you go into the rev share space, like, it's going to be money is going to come way down in SEC baseball. I mean, there were teams that spent between $2 and $3 million, this past year on baseball, and schools are just not going to allocate that much from a revenue share standpoint, and you're going to have like real actual NIL deals to go above rev share totals. And from what I can gather, it's probably going to be about $700,000 to $800,000 for a lot of schools when it comes down to rev share. Some even less than that, maybe some slightly more. In the SEC now, schools without football programs, they may be doing something a little bit different, right? Like, so
St. John's in basketball,
right. Like, if you don't have a football program, you still have that full revenue share cap that you can spend, and you could spend $10 million on the baseball program if you want to. And get away with it if you don't have a football program. But, these SEC schools, I mean, they're not going to sacrifice their football programs. They're not going to sacrifice their men's basketball programs. And, once you get past those high dollar sports, then it comes down to how do you want to spend it. And, from what I've been able to gather, I think most schools are going to be around that 700,000 range, and maybe some a little bit more, maybe some a little bit less. But when you're used to spending, $1.5 million or more, sometimes double that for some of these schools, having that number cut in half or more is going to be kind of a shock to the system, and it's going to be a shock to the system of the players who are going into the portal. They'll hear, "Oh, my buddy last year got $150,000. How come I'm only getting 15?" Well, there's a big difference this year in what teams are going to be able to spend. Now, again, that's all if the house settlement goes through, and we'll see if that happens this week or not. But I think there's been some chatter out there that's what might happen.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It's interesting times right now in college athletics, and it's getting harder and harder to call it college athletics. I'm one who would like to see it go back to, I don't even care, do the bag man. That's fine. I don't care. But this is getting outlandish, and having coaches having in-house fights about how much their program gets versus another athletics program at the school. I mean, I've heard some stories. I've heard some stories from SEC programs where football just does not care about anybody else at all. And there's not a lot of camaraderie there. It's a lot of fighting. So we'll see. I asked this question, John, and we'll close out with this. I ask you every year, what should a South Carolina Gamecock baseball fans' expectation be for this baseball program? And has your opinion changed after this past year?
And I get this question a lot, and I ask it, or I answer it basically all the time. It's like, it's really hard to put those things into like set metrics. Like, I know people want to say, like, College World Series 2 out of every 5 years, and Super Regional 2 out of every 5 years, and regional once, and missing a tournament is unacceptable. Well, I can't necessarily get on board with that line of thinking. I mean, I think you need to have a baseline goal of what a program should be. And the baseline goal of the program in South Carolina, the chief goal should be to make it to the College World Series. But you have to be able to make it into the NCAA tournament to be able to do that. And I think that's kind of what the baseline goal needs to be. And, but how are you going to best position yourself to reach the ultimate goal of being in the College World Series? Like, to me, you have to evaluate the program each year and figure out the trajectory of it. Do I believe that this guy can get us to where we want to go? Do I believe that we're doing the things as an athletics department to enable our coaches to achieve those goals? Are we going in the right direction? What do we have to change? What do we have to do differently if we're not? It basically comes down to, do I believe in the guy or the girl or whoever who's leading whatever program? And, when you don't believe in that person to be able to do the job anymore, I think that's when you have to make the change. But, I think about it differently than I think most do. Like, I'm not the one who sits there and says, because what if you don't achieve that goal? Like,
Yeah.
What if, if you're Troy, let's pick Troy baseball for a minute here. Like, Troy baseball just missed the tournament for the second time in a row after making it to the regional the year before. Skylar Mead's been down there for 4 years. He's made one tournament. Like, if your goal is if your expectation is to make the tournament, 2 out of every 4 years, and you've just made it once, like, do you fire the guy? Well, he's been in the last 4 out twice. Like, each of the last 2 years, they've stumbled a little bit at the end and didn't make it into the tournament. Do we think that the program is that far off to where, we've got to get rid of the guy, that we have to make major overhauls in what we're doing? When you start setting goals and benchmarks of, this is what we have to accomplish, in a given time frame, I don't think those things really line up. So, I think you have to go into South Carolina baseball understanding that, this is a College World Series caliber program, and we are going to do everything it takes to get there. And, if we're not positioned to be able to do that, why is that? Is that because of what's happening from a leadership standpoint within the team? Is it because of a leadership standpoint in the university? How do we fix it? Are these the right people to fix it? What do we have to do? And to me, that's how you kind of evaluate it. South Carolina baseball should be a College World Series contending team. It should be a SEC championship contending team. And you're not there right now. Doesn't feel like you're anywhere close, because you're not. You can double the SEC win total next year and still miss the NCAA tournament, which is just crazy to me to think about. But Jeremiah Donati's got to ask himself some questions, and maybe the buyout's prohibitive. And I don't know.
I think that you did a great job in breaking that down the way you should think about it. And I think when you talk about 3 out of 5 years, whatever your number of set years is and the goal, it's a lot easier to look back in retrospect, because there were teams at South Carolina, even under Mark Kingston, that were College World Series caliber teams, but ran into another College World Series caliber team before they got to Omaha. And are you going to really say, oh, that season sucked, and, fire the coach? I mean, it's the same reason with Lamont Paris. I say, he's a good basketball coach. He's a great basketball coach. But if you don't have guys that can run your system, you got to fix that. Get the guys that can, or change your system.
Yeah, and that brings up another point to relate to South Carolina baseball. Like, I call some ways back before the 22 season. People were wanting Mark Kingston to be fired, going into that before that season ever started. And they had just hired Justin Parker, and they had just hired Chad Kaye, and there were some elements going into that season. They just hadn't recruited well enough, and they just hadn't. But they made some changes to get the program going in the right direction. Anyway, before that season started, I wrote, just to sum it up pretty succinctly, this team is going to suck. This team's not going to be very good. Like they're short on pitching, they're short on this, short on that. They're just not going to be very good. But we need to kind of excuse this year because the program trajectory is trending in the right direction with these guys here. The talent's getting better. The coaching staff is better. I said 2023 should be a really good year for this team. And what was 2023? It's a really good year for the team. I mean, they were in position to be a top 8 seed, and they had a bunch of injuries right there near the end of the season. Braylon Wimmer went down with that hamstring. The Will Tippett had the hand. I mean, they had to play Evan Stone at second base for one game, which he hadn't done since he was like in 9th grade. Like, I mean, they were playing Cole Messina at third and catching Jonathan French, like Talmadge LaCroix at shortstop. Like, things just kind of fell apart a little bit at the end, but you still hosted a regional. And you went and were really competitive with Florida down there in the Super Regional, who was one of the hottest teams in the country. They ended up losing in the championship series. So, I mean, you have to have a little bit of foresight when you're evaluating, like, where a program is going. Now, was Mark Kingston ultimately the right guy? Obviously not. But, it just kind of says you've got to look a little bit ahead and see – what do I like about where the program's going, or what do I not like, and figure out if those are the right people to get you there and just kind of the trajectory the program's on. So I just look at it a little bit differently than most. And, obviously the goals never change. I mean, you make it into the NCAA tournament, you have a chance. You want to host a regional, you want to be a top 8 to be able to host a super, you want to compete for championships. And, that's where the program should be. And, that's where the program needs to get back to.
I think you said it perfectly, John. And look, stay tuned to thebigspur.com, because not only are Alex and Hale going to be knocking this football recruiting coverage over the summer out of the park. And obviously you got Tony and JC and Whittle's going to be all over every program. I don't know how you guys have enough time in the day. I mean, Alex, he pumps out 18 articles a day. I don't know when he sleeps. And I know John's pushing him for 20 a day. So Alex will get there at some point. And then John probably has his fingerprints more on this program than anybody else associated with Gamecock athletics in the media. There's not a lot that goes on without John Whittle finding that out. And John, you just do such a great job covering every sport at South Carolina. And you've been, in my opinion, the best college baseball, like, university media member for any program for the past decade plus. And to see you dipping your toes into softball and soccer and basketball and, giving your football takes. I mean, track and field, the equestrian team. I mean, nobody knows more about this university than you. And to have you on our show tonight has been an absolute treat and a pleasure.
Well, Hale is our track and field beat reporter, but I'll take the other ones. I did do some equestrian stuff, and they did all right this year, huh? I mean, they did okay. They won the SEC for the first time since I don't even remember now, 2000. Whatever it was, been a while, but they've, but I appreciate your kind words. I've been doing this a long time now. So if I'm not any good at this point, I need to find a new career. So I've tried to work hard over the years and appreciate the kind words, but we have a great team of folks at the Big Spur, as you rattled off, and we can't do it without guys like Alex and Hale and JC and Tony and Ryan Bethea, who was out in the hot sun for I don't know how many baseball games and softball games this year, and right after doing a heck of a job covering the women's hoops team. So we got a great team, and I'm happy to be a part of it for sure. Well,
Alex, any parting shots before we get out of here?
No, it's going to be fun to keep up with the off season for baseball, because it's, as we kind of mentioned, there's a lot of different pieces they need, but it's going to be interesting off season, but we'll see what's going to happen.
Well, for myself, for John, for Alex, we thank you all for being a part of the show tonight. And when you listen and you join us on the show, you give us the most valuable thing you have, which is your time. And we just appreciate y'all so much. If you ever have a question, you can find us all on thebigspur.com. The chat box is always open on this show. So we're here for you and we appreciate you. And with that, we'll call it a night. Have a good one, John. It finally got dark.
Yeah, it finally got dark. Now I'm just a floating head, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I'll see y'all later. Bye.